Thank you very much. We were supposed to have Barbara from Hardware Club on stage. Unfortunately, she got ill. She's sick in Paris, in bed, hopefully resting a little bit. So sorry she couldn't make it. But we have Raph, which is also amazing. My name is Wauters. I'm a journalist. I work for a company that I founded. It's called Tech.eu. About 4 years ago, I write about the European tech industry, not necessarily about hardware only. But I'm personally quite interested in seeing this, vertical, this space develop more. So we're going to have a chat about hardware investment. But first, introduce yourself, Raph.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So Raph, I'm based in London. We are Startupbootcamp. So how many of you know Startupbootcamp in the room? All right, we still have the work to do, clearly. It's not there yet. We are one of the global accelerators. We have about 25 programs around the world. We run vertical themes accelerators, and we range from India, Australia, China, Europe a lot, of course, and we're European by base, and the US. And we launched recently some scale-up accelerators as well in San Francisco. So we range from early stage to later stage companies. What we do is, as you can imagine, any accelerators, we really support young entrepreneurs, and we want to build an ecosystem around those entrepreneurs. And my remit as an ex-corporate guy, because I've been 15 years in Apple before, and between the Valley and Europe, is to help young entrepreneurs get to market around particularly IoT and hardware. And so we've been in London doing this for 2 years. We closed our second batch a couple of weeks ago with a bang-on Science Museum-based demo day, which was incredible, which Robin couldn't attend, and and it was a really good show because we love the hardware people, and it's well, we'll talk about it, but it's hard. So there you go. That's what I do.
Thank you so much. So one of the things that I don't like about this topic, and actually Preet, our moderator friend, mentioned this in the beginning, this cliche of hardware is hard. It is, but really, is software that easy? Doing a startup is hard. Has hardware really, is it that much more difficult? Has it become easier over the last few years?
The famous adage that our friends from the US said, software is eating the world, right? Remember that? I think hardware is eating the world right now. So it used to be a lot harder than it is today. And it's stuck because, you're creating a physical device. It takes a lot of capital to do it. It takes a lot of time to do it. And then you want to put it on the shelves for the consumer side of it. And it takes a lot of other skill set as managing your inventory, creating back channels, understanding how to work with retail, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a difficult craft rather than having a couple liner codes and pushing it on an app store. So on paper, it is harder. But it is now a massive industry that have been totally commoditized, and that with the rise of Chinese manufacturing, Eastern Europe manufacturing, and also other countries, it's getting a lot easier. So yeah, I agree. It's not that hard.
And on a related note, can you really talk about hardware startups as a specific category? Because really what you're doing now is building hardware plus software companies. And it's a combination of both. Right. And you need to be in control of your own software, for the most part, at least.
Yeah, absolutely true. There's one thing that we do in general when we select, we talk to north of 1,500 startups every year before we select the last 10 that gets into our program. So quite wide area of companies that we talk to. Not a single one that we want to have will have only a dumb device. Hardware is just the base of it, but what we care about is really the data, the analytics, the solution itself, and what value they bring really to market. So hardware is just the mean to an end, literally. Now, people are stuck, particularly investors are stuck at the hardware piece, but at the end of the day, what they really want to be looking at is indeed, how much data do you get, what kind of data do you get, and the hardware allows to get more refined, more, valuable inputs. That's what it is, really.
And from an investor perspective, what specific skills do you need as an investor to be successful in this space?
I guess there's a variety of different skill set that we need, but I want to go back to what you were saying on creating a company, because it's true for hardware as much as a software company. One of the things that we want to be really clear on is we don't select companies unless they have a minimum of 2 co-founders. And that reason is we want a complementarity of skill set. Hardware companies traditionally will come from engineers that would have, a background of hardware engineering, engineering as electrical engineering or those kind of things. At the end of the day, if we only have 2 hardware engineers in the team, it's going to be totally unbalanced. Similarly, if you were to take a company that does software and they only have software development skills, you're going to miss all the rest, which is, as we know, how to develop the product, how to sell the solutions, a bit of business, a bit of sales, a bit of, all kind of different skill sets. So it's the balance of it that matters. Having said that, it's also critical to get the basics, right? We've seen a company recently who had a very good idea, not a product yet, and that's already a problem for us. We don't invest at idea stage. But also, they really didn't have any of the skill set necessary to create the product itself. So how do you get from there? So they were basically too early for us. But we really liked the idea, so we sort of plugged those guys into an earlier stage, incubator stage, where they could start finding potential peers and create a company around that. And so that's really where it starts to be interesting, because you get to have the right skill set, which is hard to find, and you get to have the right ideas, and you plug those two, and then you create something really valuable.
You say you don't invest in ID stage, which I totally get, but how far along does the company need to be for you to be interested as an investor? Do they need to have a working prototype? Do they need to have a product on the market with traction?
So when we started about 7 years ago, very different times in terms of markets, and we were looking only at existing working prototypes, which is that stage pre-fundraising most of the time, like pre-product, pre-attraction, of course. And that means that most of the time they were post-idea that worked a little bit on a product. They had an Arduino, Raspberry Pi-based kind of prototype, but nothing really tangible. And as we know, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, the difficulty between an early stage prototype, a refined product, and then getting into the manufacturing stage, manufacturable stage is quite a journey. So we looked at that very early stage one. The market has evolved quite a bit since then, and the maturity of our industry in the world of IoT and hardware in general has evolved as well alongside it. So we do look now today at company. This year in our batch, for example, we had 2 companies that raised $1.5 million, or close to it anyway, and they already had customers generating revenue. They're so much later stage companies. They still came to us because of the value what they can bring in terms of connecting the dots with partners and investors and even manufacturers. But at the end of the day, they were not prototype stage. So it varies a lot, but we wouldn't take anything below that working prototype stage in any case, because that's too early.
What is the added value that you bring to the table? Is it connection to supply chain, distribution, or is it mostly other investors to do follow-on rounds and to keep the company growing and scaling?
It's a lot of different things, actually. And I think one of our success this year particularly was that we migrated from a pretty established curriculum inside the program to a more ad hoc kind of systematic approach, which is, as I said, when you have a company that is barely out of a prototype phase and a company that's already selling to HSBC and Deloitte, clearly they don't need the same things. What we've done is we've managed to have not an a la carte, but close to it, kind of a menu of series of support that we can do. But if I want to summarize this, it goes from access to manufacturing, access to business model, access to fundraising, access to corporate partners, channel, distribution, and also access to all kind of knowledge. So we had in-residence people, typically, so a fundraising in residence, an investor in residence, Chris, that we know, good friend of ours. We had a designer in residence to help with not only design of the product, but also a creative designer in residence to look at how you display the product on stage and everything. We had pitch training, obviously, as you do, because they end up being on stage and need to be able to present the product. So it's a variety of different skill set that we bring them, or expertise that we bring them. The secret sauce, though, are the mentors. And so I spent about 1.5 years, almost 2 years in building that program and surrounding it with a group of 90+ mentors that are all in that industry, people that understand what IoT and a device requires, and people that have a large variety of skill set, again, from marketing experts down to business sales experts, down to legal experts on IP, down to fundraising and investors, and all kind of different people working in the manufacturing stage of it. Those people are the key to make this work, because they basically are the one working hand in hand with each of the teams, supporting them on a daily basis on how to execute their product and distribute it. So that's what we bring to them.
Great. You were talking about a few aspects there, manufacturing, distribution, etc. Where do you find most entrepreneurs in this space stumble? Where do they find the biggest barriers and challenges?
Yeah, that's obviously a good question. The mid stage is the one that is the hardest one. Getting an idea, getting a prototype, pretty much everybody can do that. Growing from that first bit of getting an Arduino-based working device, getting through that bill of material. Everybody know what the bill of material is? Yeah, good. It's basically the list of all the components you need to define to create a product. It seems trivial, You have all kind of different sort of options in terms of the sensors, the cables, the electricity, all kind of different things. And to be able to define the right ones that, by the way, need to work with one another, that you would have tested with the right firmware, that requires skills and time and a bit of money, of course. So that's where it gets a little bit harder than just plugging those elements on an Excel spreadsheet, because then you need to do what we call design for manufacturing, which is getting into that second phase of the product definition where you can send a CAD file, a design file to a manufacturer with the right set of components, and him doing that first batch. So first, it costs money, and if they don't have that money, it's hard for them to go through that. Second, that's where the errors comes in. That's where the assumptions get wrong. You need to correct and amend, and need to have the strength to be able to go through that first phase. There's that, the valley of death of companies that we have in general cycle of startups. In a hardware company, it's a lot earlier, because that's where they tend to go, and it's like, well, I can't do that anymore. It's done. This doesn't work, right? So that's the first step. The second one is then getting to that second batch and distribution. Crowdfunding helped tremendously on that for a couple of years, because it was one of the most new ways of getting validation of the product on the market. This is not a fundraising platform, by the way. We should know that, right? It's more about validating that there is a demand or market for that particular product on the consumer field. And it helps spread that across many more people that you would be even able to touch on your own. So that spread the word. But it's not still a way to distribute a product, because you still need to get to that phase where you're manufacturing the product, you got enough on hand, you have enough capital to distribute it, sell it, et cetera. And then comes distribution. So you got all different kinds of levels of the complexity.
On a personal level, I've been involved in a couple of these crowdfunding projects, because I used to get very excited, pre-order, and then I would have to wait a year longer than I was supposed to for the product, or it never arrived, or whatever went wrong. So I stopped doing crowdfunding about 2-3 years ago. I find that a lot of people are kind of getting rid of it of risk averse in a way of the crowdfunding. Yeah,
but that's also, I'd say, any solution out there will mature at one point. We get into the maturity phase now, which then real sort of use of crowdfunding is more about validation of the product, more than just crazy ideas go through. And also, it's such a wide variety of solutions out there now. It's not a communication campaign anymore. You can't get into a crowdfunding campaign without having your crowd validated, like between 30 and 40,000 people already pre-validated with their email, so you're ready to distribute that. Most of the companies now go in there with a minimum funding so they can prepay that crowdfunding elements of campaign between 10, 15, 20K, depending on what you do. And third, you need to have, particularly for hardware, you need to have already planned, prepaid, and ready to roll your production lineup, right? So you don't go in crowdfunding saying, I'm going to get money and then I'm going to figure out what I want to do, which is what those first campaigns were about.
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to.
Exactly. So then they got into a year long of production discussions, iteration of the prototype. They don't do that anymore. And also crowdfunding companies help people realize you need to be. It's basically a 6 months to 8 months of preparation before you even launch a campaign. Ready.
So what about the later stage? Because it's a shame that Barbara couldn't make it today, because she has established as a co-founder of a fund that's very, very specific about hardware. Globally, I think she invests. But you don't see a lot of those. You don't see a lot of hardware-specific focused funds. Do you think we'll see more? Do we need more?
Definitely. I'm not only thinking, I'm hoping, and we're pushing for that. Yeah, so they raised about 28 million dollars actually, $20 million for specifically investing in hardware company. In addition, Hardware Club created that. I'm making their own advertising now. I created that incredible community of close to 200 plus top hardware companies that have product on the shelves already. To go back to your point, we see more and more theme-based investors, not hardware-based, but theme-based. And they go through a various different phase of acceptance and grief and go back to it. Both in the Valley as well as in Europe, and also mainly in China and Asia in general, because on the east side of the world, there's a lot of people investing in that space because that's where the manufacturing comes from. But in Europe and in the US, it's getting into the phase of maturity of the market where people invest in things such as smart manufacturing, so the B2B side of things, which in that case, if you don't look at the consumer side of IoT and hardware, I'd say the hardware is almost commoditized, and it doesn't really matter how well designed it is, as long as it's robust and it can sustain the long time. So the barrier to entry in capital for hardware is a lot less complex and a lot less heavy on their capital and expensive than it would be for a consumer product. That's part of the conversation I have on stage in about 30 minutes about the evolution of the world of IoT from what used to be very crazy consumer ideas down to now real valuable, life-changing kind of technologies. And it went through that balance of consumer to B2B. So there's more and more coming on that front.
You also see existing VC firms having an increasing interest in hardware IoT?
Yeah. So 2017 was the year of a lot of consumer failures in IoT, right? We've seen the Jawbone, the Fitbit, we've seen the valuation of companies just drowning terribly. So from that very first generation of investors came out a couple of new ones that are investing smartly in all the kind of devices that are less about gizmos and crazy solutions and more about real sort of impactful tech. That new generation of investors that are not your traditional VCs from back in the days, which will be coming back after, but they're still in hiatus for now, are actually generating a complete different way of looking at those companies. So I'm quite bullish and happy about this, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
Are you bullish about Europe? Does Europe have any edge when it comes to hardware?
Engineering-wise, yes. Creating-wise, yes. Manufacturing, less. Investing, not yet.
So how can we fix that?
We're working on it. We're bringing more investors. We're bringing more attention to Europe. We're bringing more companies out of Europe. And we're making as much noise as we can, saying, guys, look at those incredible innovators that there is around here. It's about putting them out on the map. It's about showing that it's not only American companies that can create cool products. And actually, it's less and less that. I mean, let me get a quick example back. When I was in the Valley with Apple back in mid-2000, most of the engineers that we had in the team were from Europe. They're not American-based. They were American-based because they were working in the Valley, but they were European-trained and educated people. And it is a common knowledge that there's been a massive amount of European people that are the best in creating those ideas that migrated to the US because that's where it was happening. Less and less this is the case. Less and less they need to leave their hometown, less and less they need to leave their country because there's a lot of innovation happening. I mean, you look at Latvia, you look at Estonia, you look at those countries in Baltics, it's extremely innovative. And so there's a lot of things that can be created. The scaling aspect of it is the complexity, is that when you want to grow, then you need to migrate into different areas, but not necessarily out of Europe. London is a great scene, Paris is exploding, you go to Berlin, it's been there, maybe less on hardware, but it's still there. So you got all the, and you know that more than me, you browse Europe about this. So it's getting definitely more visible. And you take an example as, the Web Summit guys who went to Lisbon this year, the amount of investment that I've seen from the US back to Europe, you track that very well, is promising, to say the least.
Absolutely. I'm going to give you the last 2 minutes of this session to make some promotion for Startup Bootcamp startups. I'm sorry I missed your demo day. So the tricky part about these 2 minutes is that you actually have to pick 2 companies that you really, really like out of that batch.
Damn. Is Matisse in the room? Because we got one of the guys who's coming actually from here, went through Startup Wise guys. So Squad Robotic, I'm going to call them out. They should be around. They were pitching earlier today. So they're a good company from you guys, from that region. Very smart option that allows to sort of render, cleaning machines and autonomous and I don't want to call them robots, but all those sort of indoor factories, machines, autonomous. That's what they're looking into. And so getting more productivity out, getting less accidents, getting more efficiency out of it and everything. So that's one. The second one, it's a tough one.
It was this Internet of Trees thing.
Yeah, I like those guys from Honduras. So we're lucky this year we had 9 companies and they were coming from all around the world. We scaled literally in 65 different countries. So we had Canadians, Hondurans, Hungarian, Latvian, Israeli, all kind of different countries. And it gives an amazing diversity in the way we create that cohort. Our Honduran guy created this company called Internet of Trees that allows to create that device that diagnoses preempt fires in forests and regions like those. And clearly, when you look at what happened in California recently, it is a key element to bring to the market. And it's a fairly simple solution. So they've done a really good job at creating that and putting that out there. And now they're working a lot, alongside forest NGOs as well as governments and institutions to look at how we can install that as many places as possible to avoid those terrible fires.
Quick final question. When does the next selection period for the following batch?
Yeah, we're reopening applications in less than a month from now. So you go to startupbootcamp.org. and you look for the IoT program in London, and we'll be scouting the world for that. And this is going to be between B2B companies, smart manufacturing, smart retail, smart energy, smart, all kind of different sort of smarts. And we want to look also at impact tech, so anything around tech for good, but also IoT device that enables better solution that impact environment, society, education, health, all kind of different things. So if you have a good company, you're interested in talking to us, come and see me.
Great. If you're a founder or a wannabe founder, you should definitely take a look. Thank you, Raph. That's all the time we have. I think we have some time for questions. Yes, we do. For Raph, or who knows, for me.
Who wants to ask a question? Look, very good. Very good. Where is the catch box? Catch box is going. Look. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this great introduction. I'm from Protatron. It is Tech Ideas Prototyping Fund, so we can call it. And as I see, our alumni is most of them are already some expertise in some kind of entrepreneurs. So they are already coming from the factories or from kind of businesses. But my idea is can you maybe suggest how we can bring research topics and some ideas from the university to the market? What can this journey, how we can help them? Thank you.
That's a very, very good question. It's a hard thing to do. So universities and research institutions have been a target that we've been looking at very closely. The difficulty is the stage. To give you an example, when we started scouting 2 years ago, we looked primarily at consumer ideas. And I wanted to be looking at industrial ideas and B2B applications. They were primarily only at idea stage and technology pieces in research institutions, in universities, or in spin-off of companies, which means they were not ready to create a company. They didn't have the skill set or the will to actually do that. So they tend to go one step before they get to join us to do that particular creation. So I'm gonna talk about the competition right now because we love those guys. But Techstars acquired Startup Weekend recently, actually 2 years ago, I think, and that's one of the examples of one of those places where such researcher or university player can go meet other founders, potential co-founders, create a company, get a real product defined, and then they come to us and we can help them scale and get to where they need to be. But that intermediate, sort of period of creation is just before we can help them, basically.
There is another question there. Can you catch and throw the box?
Hi, Tommy from Karma. I wanted to ask a question about this dumb hardware startups that we also are kind of okay to do those ones that we think collect data and have some secret sauce in the intelligence on software side. But have you guys seen, looking back past 5 years, dumb hardware startups from Europe where somebody from Asia stole the idea and beat them with that?
Yes, so many of them, of course. So the problem is your USP and your differentiator will never come from the hardware unless you got a very high IP there, which is totally life and game changer. You need then to patent that the hell out of it very quickly. Even though it won't protect you against Chinese copycats, it will at least help keep your IP for yourself. But most of the time, the only way to protect you against Chinese copycats is basically the software and the back end of what you do. That's the only way, because they're really good at copying hardware. They're not that good at copying software yet. So we've seen time and time again companies trying to get their product on the shelves, actually going through crowdfunding. About a day before they would go to crowdfunding, they would see the product already on the shelves. And as a matter of fact, we encourage every single founder that we see out there to go and look actively at many of the Chinese manufacturers, because most of the companies they want to create with ideas are already on the shelves in China anyway. They don't need to reproduce. So what we call commoditized and what we look at, commoditized products, you can most likely find your product already being manufactured. Just take that product, add on top your layer of smartness, which is the software, the backend, the analytics, the solution you want to bring, and then you're going to, first of all, save a lot of money, avoid the copycat because you're already using an existing solution, and third, be smarter in the way you distribute a product anyway. So yeah, it's a common mistake.
Do we have one more question? One more question. Yes, there. Can you just pass the box? Or you can try to throw it because it's awesome to throw. Okay.
Hi, I'm Natalie from the European Startup Initiative. And you said that you scout in 65 countries. If I was a promising IoT startup What would I do to catch your eye?
Come and talk to me. That's very
Easy.
simple.
But what if I'm not here today, for example?
So scouting is a large word to say we talk to north of 1,500 startups across the board in various different ways, virtual and physical. I've done 32 conferences last year, so a lot of people can touch me and talk to me. And you can ask this guy. I'm pretty open-minded and talking to everyone. But if you really want to be actually getting there, you need to apply, right? So get on our website the sooner it's open, which is I think in about it should be in beginning of March or something. Then apply, and then we'll go through that sort of selection process, and then we can talk. But it's the first step is basically the application. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for.
Thank you for
and give
joining.
them a big applause.